Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with some extra credits. This time we're going to do another standalone video from their extra history series. This time, Saragarhi, The Last Stand. I believe this is with like 21 Sikhs, fucking doing something badass. I think fighting off some people from Afghanistan. What I'm leaning towards. It sounds like I've heard of this, but I don't know much about it. Before we dive in, though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you join the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Alright, let's just go ahead and dive right in, shall we?
Afghanistan, graveyard of empires, where Alexander met his match, where the great Soviet would stumble. But right now, September
and where the British also failed.
Of 1897, the British Empire takes its turn playing out
that's what we're going with.
Their own tragedy in the heat and the dust. Eventually, they too will leave enervated, sapped of strength by this unforgiving land. But not today.
Bum, bum,
In 1857, a great uprising had swept through India and nearly displaced the British forces there. Since then, the British continue.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a near thing. It wasn't a near thing. I'm sorry. I read a book on it. Can't remember what the book is titled. I've shown it off on the stream before. I mean, not on stream. Well, actually, I have shown it on stream. Go follow me at Twitch. I've shown it on the channel before in, I think, another video on the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. From what I remember, it was not that near of a thing. They had, they weren't all that, they were a semi-unified force, but they really only took like a couple cities. And when the British came in to put the rebellion down, they pretty handedly put the rebellion down. Because it wasn't like a whole wide, ultimate Indian rebellion, hence why it's just called the Sepoy Rebellion. It was just pretty much the Sepoys. So it wasn't a unified effort as what we would see come at the turn of the 20th century and start getting built up there with Gandhi. So, you know, that's wrong. It wasn't a near thing. The British did not almost lose control. What happened, though, because of this rebellion, is that I believe it was Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria pretty much was like, all right, this rebellion led to essentially the dissolvement of the British East India Company, because in 1857, India was under the control of the East India Company and not technically under the direct control of the crown. However, because of really the failures of the 1857 rebellion, the crown steps in more, starts taking control more, and eventually the East India Company is no longer in control or really much of a thing. That takes a few years, though, I believe. Anyways.
Fought smaller rebellions to hold on to the jewel of their empire. Today is September 12th, 1897. Dawn comes to the very boundary of empire. We stand in the uncontrolled borderland that would today be just on the Pakistani side of the Pakistan-Afghanistan divide. The British Empire has been trying to consolidate its hold on this wild, untamed region for some time. They've built a string of forts to help them project power into the mountains tribeland. In this string of forts, there are two named Fort Gulliston and Fort Lockhart. And between these two forts stands a tiny, threadbare village called Saragarhi. It is this village that concerns us today. Because in that village, the British had established a signaling post so that Fort Gulliston and Fort Lockhart could communicate with each other.
Oh.
And they had manned that post with a handful of Sikhs. Dawn breaks. The men wash, go through their morning meditation, affix their turbans, and begin their day. Over the last 10 days, there have been probing attacks on the forts. There's a sense that something is brewing. Everybody is on high alert. The Sikhs man their posts and begin their morning tasks. The air is dry, thin in the mountain passes. The day is clear. Someone tells a joke to break the tension, and everybody laughs, but the feeling remains. One of the lookouts shouts, "There's a great mass moving on the horizon."
Gasp.
All 21 men in this tiny post take up defensive stations. The signalman operates a tiny hand-cranked mirror that lets him send messages to the forts by making Morse code out of flashes of light. He signals Fort Lockhart to let them know the situation. Fort Lockhart signals back that they count at least 14 standards, at least 10,000 tribesmen, once allied with the British but now in full revolt. And
Ooh.
they are descending on the fort, with only the little signaling post standing in their way. All around the signalmen, the rest of the unit is piling up ammunition and barring the gates of their tiny
Isn't there a movie on this? Probably should watch that movie. I really like movies like this shit.
compound. The signalman sends a fateful message. "Can you send help?" There's a moment's delay, then a reply. No. They won't get there in time, and they can't leave the fort unguarded. The men in the signaling unit gather around their commander, Ishar Singh, knowing that they could still make a break for it. But Ishar calmly tells them what they are, in their hearts, already prepared for. They will stay, and they will fight. They will delay the oncoming tribesmen as long as possible. They will buy the forts the time they need to call in reinforcements. There is no disagreement, no mutiny or desertion. There is only a quiet acknowledgement as the men get back to work. The signalman returns to his mirror. Throughout the day, he will never stop relaying the events.
Really?
The sound of the
That's fucking badass, dude.
onrushing horde grows louder. Rifles crack. Then the horde is upon them, assaulting the outer wall. The disciplined fire of the Sikh troops break the first wave of rushing tribesmen, but they are like the sea, rolling back, reforming, and then rushing forward again with even greater strength. Bodies drop all along the killing field in front of the signal post, 20 rifles roaring against 10,000. But this time, it's not enough to break the charge. Shells pepper the rough-hewn walls. One of the signal company falls dead.
No.
Then the enemy is at the wall, climbing, clambering up, determined. A brief melee, knives and swords and bayonets and rifle butts. They break the wave again, but this time there's Sikh blood in the dust, under the baking sun. The bodies of the fallen are carried back to the inner wall. Each loss is a friend, one of only 21 holding this station, and that number is dropping. Shouts are heard from outside the wall. The tribe's leaders are promising the Sikhs wealth, safety, positions of importance if they just abandon their post. No man budges. The sun falls low on the horizon, turned a smear of blood scarlet by the smoke. The attackers have set fire to the low brush that clings to the hills surrounding the fort. The Sikhs look out, trying to see the shapes of their foes through the thick gray smoke. Then the signalman shouts. The neighboring fort has flashed a dire warning. From their position on the hill, the fort spotted a handful of tribesmen coming out of the smoke on a blind approach to the side of the signaling station.
You know what's cool about this? Like, isn't just really Sargari fighting this alone. It isn't just the Sikhs fighting this alone. Even though it sucks that the British are not sending aid, it sucks a lot. They have... I will give them understandable... And it's understandable why the British are not sending the forces out to Sargari, right? They are in a strategically better, advantageous spot by staying inside the fort. And like they said, let's say they sent troops and it didn't go well and Sargari fell, then they wouldn't have enough troops to defend that fort. And that could spiral, right? So it's understandable if that is the thought process. As long as that's the thought process and it isn't the thought process of, oh, let the Sikhs die, then we're okay, right? But of course, there's always a chance that maybe a commanding officer is thinking, let the Sikhs die. There's always that chance. You don't know. At least that's not information we've been given yet. So I think I'm going to go with the benefit of the doubt. But I think it's really cool that the fort, although they're not yet sending reinforcements, they're at least helping somewhat. They're kind of like, still sitting back and letting the Sikhs do all the fighting, but they're at least, hey, they're coming up on this side or whatever,
They've breached the first wall. Ishar Singh barks orders, breaking off a handful of men to defend the breach. When shots sound from the flanking attack, the main force again rushes the main gates with their now diminished defenders. Soon, all combat deteriorates to a desperate melee with bayonet, knife, boot, and sword. Tribesman after tribesman falls to the Sikhs' cold steel, but the weight of numbers takes its toll. Inch by inch, the Sikhs are pushed back. Each soldier of the signal post sells his life dearly, slaying dozens for each defender that falls. But soon there are only a handful of the signal troop left. Ishar Singh orders his men to fall back, to retreat to the comparative safety of the inner wall and remount a defense. But they can't break and get through the gate without giving their attackers an opening to force their way through. Ishar knows this. He tells his men to go, and then bellows, charging the swarming tribesmen with sword and pistol in hand. For a few valiant seconds, he cuts down attacker after attacker, and then is overwhelmed. His blood stains the rock, but it is enough. His men have taken to the inner wall and formed a second defensive position. He knew, and they know, that the position is still hopeless, but it'll buy the forts more time, and cost their assailants more dearly. Fewer than a dozen men now stand to return fire. Every shot fired into the swirling mass before them is almost certainly fatal, but axes and clubs and rifle butts hammer against the thin wooden gate to the inner wall. It's not long before the gate comes crashing down. The signalman sends out one final message, requesting permission to take up his rifle. When the fort grants it, he packs his signal gear back up in its leather case and affixes his bayonet to his rifle. The men from the fort can only watch as the signalman moves to hold the door to his small signal shed. He is the last Sikh alive in the fort.
No.
For a moment, they cheer as he fells one tribesman and then another, and then 18 more. The tribesmen pull back, and for a moment the troops are hopeful, but then they see the smoke. The assailants have lit the signal station on fire. Later, it will be reported that the signalman yelled the Sikh battle cry over and over as the fires burned. Bole so nihal, Sat Sri Akal, or shout aloud in ecstasy, true is the great timeless one. The signal post is taken, but the 21 Sikhs stand have bought their neighboring forts the time they needed. By the time the rebelling tribesmen attack, the forts have been reinforced, and they succeed in turning back the tide. When at last the British retake that little signaling post in that tiny mountain village of Saragarhi, they find that the 21-man signaling unit had left behind hundreds of enemy casualties. The Battle of Saragarhi is the only time in British military history where every single soldier involved in a military action was awarded the highest military honor available to them. You can argue how much impact their sacrifice had, of course. The British would lose all influence over Afghanistan in less than 25 years, and would lose control over India 1 month before the 50th anniversary of this battle. But this battle serves to remind us of all the groups that have sacrificed to make great nations great. The groups that we sometimes forget when we talk merely about the history of great powers and movements on the world stage. And that alone is something worth remembering, even 120 years later.
This was a fucking good episode. This was exceptionally well told. This might be one of my favorite episodes out of everything we've watched so far on the channel. I think this might be my favorite extra history video that they have done. I think I'm gonna give this the #1 slot because it stands on its own. It's a one-off story, right? So I think, yeah, this was really well done. This was well made, except for that little slip up at the beginning where I understand why they said it the way they said it, where they're like, Britain almost lost, India from the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. It adds tension or whatever to the storytelling, even though it's not entirely correct. They're not entirely wrong, but it's not, the full story. Like, they lost. I don't know. The vibe I got when I was reading up on the 1857 rebellion for a class was it wasn't that close of a thing that the British were gonna lose their crown jewel, especially once they had the British armies coming in and doing stuff. But yeah, that was Saragarhi, The Last Stand, extra history by Extra Credits. I hope you guys enjoyed. I certainly did. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.